All right, now the second section that we are going to get started on would be on the process of British intervention, as you can see here. Now, I know that I mentioned that the chapters are actually being organized into three main parts, right? Or actually, rather, if you look at the textbook, right, how they organize it at the last page, they look at it as reasons for intervention and impact of the British rule. Now, if you look at the French one, right, it is actually exactly the same. Reasons for intervention, or in this case, in that case, they use the expansion, reasons for expansion in Vietnam, and the impact of the rule in Vietnam. However, right, the chapter how it's being organized in the textbook is that it actually includes one more section that's on the process of how they intervene, including Vietnam's one. It's just that for the British one so far in the past, okay, the time that I recorded this video is 2016. So in the past 2 years, 2014 and 2015, we have had seen questions that come out regarding this for the British side of things. Not the Vietnam one, but the British one, which I will go to the questions after I'm done with this parts. So it's something for you to think about. Like, it might not be under the particular the categorization of this chapter, how the chapter is being organized, but it is still something that's important for you to note. So actually, for my notes, I have actually included this section for the British side of things, although not for the Vietnam side of things. I probably need to put that in, even though we haven't seen a question like that coming up yet, but we still need to be prepared for that. And when I say this, it applies to both N and O level. All right, so it's not just for the O level students. The N level students, you would have. I will go through the questions later, and you will be able to see the questions coming out. So this section is important as well. All right, it's not something to be disregarded. Okay, and for the sake of simplicity, what you are seeing on the screen now is something that I've summarized for the entire process of the British intervention. Okay, so as I mentioned in the previous video, it started off with Strait settlement. You can test yourself by asking yourself what is the three places of the Strait settlement, and the answer is Malacca, Penang, and Singapore. So those are the three trading bases that the British basically had first. But now there was like, and we have gone through the previous parts, the first parts, part one. Okay, we have looked at it and what were the reasons why the British intervened, right? And one of the main reasons given is actually economic reasons. So as you can see here, down here, I put a trigger factor. All right, what caused the British to intervene? I will consider. I mean, the textbook also would consider this as the factor that caused them to actually want to intervene, and that is regarding the succession disputes in Perak. Okay, so this one you can please refer to the textbook. My slides are pretty bare, right? So look at the textbook for this. It goes into great detail about how the British actually go about the process of colonization, and it actually starts from page 48, okay, rather than 55 as the heading suggests. So you would be able to see from then on, okay, they actually installed the residential system under the Pankor Treaty. So the succession disputes were the ones that we discussed as well, about the Sultan who died, and then the two other sultans, his sons, who wanted to try to fight over it. It would be Sultan Ali. Sultan Ali was the one who died, and so where is it? Raja Abdullah and Raja Ismail were the ones who were fighting to take over this position of Sultan. And because of this fight, they got involved with the Gihins and the Haisans as well, the Chinese secret societies, which they sided one side. And so basically the merchants, the businessmen asked the British to intervene to ensure that there was law and order, that there was peace, so they can carry out business in a stable environment, right? So because of this succession disputes in Perak, the British therefore decided to actually intervene in Malaya, starting with Perak first. So this trigger factor started off the process of colonization. They didn't just because of this one incident in Perak that they decided to colonize the entire Malaya, but it was a slow and gradual process. Okay, so it started off with Perak, and that's where they actually signed the Pankor Treaty. So the Pankor Treaty basically installed Abdullah, Raja Abdullah as a Sultan, and of course the other guy, Ismail, he lost out. And the Sultan had to accept a British resident based in Perak, and the resident was supposed to provide advice for him on actually all matters except for those regarding Malay religion and customs. So the role of the resident here, that's what we are going to go into detail on. If the textbook, we follow textbook, will be on page 55. Okay, and that's the residential system. So let's go on first to the residential system. Okay, so like I mentioned just now, the Sultan would retain his position while the British resident acted as his advisor. So, right, as you can see in the picture here, to be honest, I do not know who is the Sultan and who is the British. It's not very clear. Yeah, but basically, I think it's all the British. Yeah, they all look like British. Yeah, they're all British. Yeah. Yep. So all the British, they all signed this Pankor Treaty together with the Sultan, and in this case, it also indicates that the British are coming to directly rule. So, in other words, one important thing to think about, or rather one point of consideration, if you are still confused between what is the difference between the British having trading basis, just a straight settlement, and whether or not they colonized the entire country. So when they had a straight settlement, basically they are not the law and order. They had to follow whatever law that the Sultan has implemented or whatever the law it is in Malaya. However, when they signed this Pankor Treaty, it meant to say that they sort of become the law. However, it is not very clear whether or not who is in charge. Whether is it the Sultan or is it the British? So it's supposed to be the advisor, right? The British resident here is supposed to be the advisor, but you're not very sure what is your actual role. So if you look at the textbook on page 55, it tells you there's a table below the bottom half of page 55, which tells you the difficulties faced by the resident and the Sultan. So the resident is supposed to do this, supposed to maintain justice and order, collect state revenue, and control how it is being spent, and basically be in charge of the money, and also to administer the states. However, they don't have specific guidelines as to how they are able to carry out this role. So they are not very sure what they need to do, whether they have the authority or whether the Sultan has the authority. So they don't have the formal authority to run the state. They don't have, all right, but they can go through the Sultan. So basically, you can say, okay, I decided to implement a 10% tax. The British resident decides to implement a 10% tax. But since he does not have the formal authority to do so, he can make the Sultan do it. But the thing here is whether does the Sultan have to absolutely follow him or not. It's not very clear here. So and also for the Sultan, when they agreed to sign this Pankor Treaty, one of the things that they lost is their political power, and basically they now actually collect sort of like a salary. They collect an income from the British rather than them deciding how much they get to earn every month. Now they are suddenly sort of like an employee of the British instead. So that's why the system is not very clear. So under this first system, the very first resident, well, if you had listened in my classes, you would have known that we talked about this guy called James Birch. Okay, James W. Birch. Now, he was the first resident of Perak, and unfortunately, his residency ended in his murder because this idiot did not really. All right, since this is a public video, I probably shouldn't be using that word. But the thing is, this guy, he was insensitive. He did not know he did not understand how the Malay customs worked, and basically he went about doing his role, and also because of the not very clear interpretation of his role, he didn't perform his role. Okay, let's not use that phrase. He was unable to perform his role well enough without clear direction from the British authorities. So as a result, he tried to change too many things too quickly. And of course, this upset the Malays a lot, and they realized that this guy looked very insensitive and ignorant to Malay culture and customs, and so therefore, well, he was murdered. Now, basically, one of the things that he tried to get rid of was debt slavery. Okay, debt slavery, DEBT is pronounced debts, not debt. All right. So he wanted to get rid of this practice of debt slavery, which makes sense to you, right? I mean, the practice is something along the line of you owe me money, you cannot pay back the money, you become my slave, something like that, lah. And so James Birch decided to try to get rid of that, which makes common sense to you at this moment, right? Because you are supposed to be educated and civilized. But of course, to the Malays, it was normal, and it was something that, why are you trying to disrupt our customs here, which is something perfectly normal for us? And so it's things like this that actually made him very, very unpopular with the Malays. And so they plotted to kill him, and they were successful. And he was bathing one fine day in a bathhouse, and well, he died in a bathtub, I guess. Right. So that is how James Birch came to an end. And the guy who took over him, Hugh Low, was somebody who was able to speak Malay fluently. He had good knowledge of the Malay culture, and he preserved the status of the Sultan and allowed the chiefs, other chiefs, the sultans itself, to participate in passing of laws. So basically, he treated them with more respect, and this guy was more welcome, lah. All right, so the residential system, well, after the experiment of James Birch, it became much better. And from then on, they slowly developed and they slowly took over in other states as well. So if you go on to page 58 of your textbook, under there, there's Selangor, Negeri, Sembilan, and Pahang. They all formed the Federated Malay States eventually. All right, so under the third point here, all right, Federated Malay States. So after the Pankor Treaty was signed, basically they go on to take other states and they form the Federated Malay States. And soon after that, they decided to further the control of it. Now, I know you notice that there are dates, and the date for the Federated Malay States ended here. That's what the textbook wrote, and to be honest, I'm not very sure why. And the unfederated Malay States gradually, from 1908 onwards, from 1909 onwards, gradually formed itself. They got the other states that were not part of the Federated Malay States to join this unfederated Malay States. So together you have straight settlement, federated Malay States, and unfederated Malay States. That forms the entire Malaya. Okay, and so we federated, unfederated, and plus the straight settlement. Okay, not the Hitler SS, but straight settlement. I'm sure you get it. Okay, so with this straight settlement, unfederated Malay States and federated Malay States, they complete the takeover of Malaya. So that's about in the early 1900s. Okay, that's only then when they actually complete the takeover of Malaya. But when the question comes about what is the reason for intervention, that will start from 1874. Okay, so now that's when, the last few minutes of this lecture, we'll look at the questions. Now for the N-levels, this is the N-level 2014 paper. So the question, look at the first question asked about Hugh Low, and you realize that there's not much that I discussed about him, and the information can only be found in textbook. So that is actually quite a difficult question. The second one is actually on the Perak succession dispute, where you have to talk about the Sultan Ali dying and the other two fighting over him, or fighting over the position. Okay, and also about trade, which would be the reasons for intervention. So this one is actually a bit more easy. If you look at my notes, it will basically be, this will be sort of like the social factor, and this will be the economic factors, the rest of the economic factors. Okay, so this is actually quite a difficult question for the express students, O-level students. I can still give you this question without these two options. So I basically just ask you, explain the reasons for the British intervention in Perak in 1874. Then after that, you have to come up with these two reasons on your own. All right. Now let's look at the O-level questions. All right. Now this is last year's question. It is on explain why the British intervened in Malaya after 1870. So there will be again reasons for intervention. You can talk about all the reasons that we discussed in part 1. Of course, it is not directly related here. Okay, but it is still slightly relevant when you talk about the succession disputes again. And then, of course, you have your SBQ. Okay, so this one's on why was Birch murdered. This one came out in 2014, the O-levels. Okay, and again, it's something that's relevant and that's something that you need to know. All right, so we'll end off this part. So please make sure you're familiar with this section, even though there's no even though. Please make sure you're familiar with this section. All right, and then we'll move on to the responses of the locals in the next video.